interview later.
Okay, that sounds good.
Yeah. Okay, so we're live. So I want to thank everyone for joining the Limping for Jesus podcast today. I am excited to have Pastor Tim Linton of the Law Church with us today. He is my first interview of my series that I'm going to be covering about what is a healthy church. What I don't want to do with this series is we're not going to attack methodology. Different churches have different methods. So if you like contemporary worship, cool. If you think drums are from the devil, also cool, I guess. I don't know what to do about that. But we are going to talk today about the marks of a healthy church. And Sam is actually an associate pastor of my wife's church. She was going there when me and Sarah met, and she was going through, maybe we'll talk about it later, their Rooted program, which is a spiritual growth program that was really good for my wife. So just a quick intro. Sam is the associate pastor of the Law Church. He's been there since 2004. He graduated from Liberty Baptist Theological Seminary. He's been married to Jamie since 2006. They have 3 kids together. He also on the side does corporate training, and you're also an author. So that's pretty neat. So you write fiction and nonfiction books?
Yes.
Okay, so what kind of nonfiction are you into?
Well, I wrote a book in 2017 about anxiety and panic attacks. I gave it to the church, and I released the book in 2020, and I bought a case of them for the church. And literally the day that the case came was the day the country shut down. So I never ended up. They're just sitting in my office still. So I'm giving them away to people. So it's for, it's a how to handle anxiety with prayer. And
we definitely needed that during 2020. Like, I think 2020 was an anxiety inducer for a lot of people.
I know. I wish I would have been 1 week earlier to get that book out.
That would have been good. Yeah. So are you, like, when you write fiction, what kind of fiction are you into?
I write a lot of different things. I write thrillers, and I've written some fantasy. A lot of it, I publish some of it. Most of it's not published, and so I do that kind of. It's almost like a hobby.
Yeah. Do you do any like sci-fi, fantasy, or?
I've never done sci-fi. I have a lot of friends that do. Mainly when I think fantasy, the kind that I go to is like kind of Lord of the Rings type stuff. You know what I mean? Like adventure, like going through the wilderness, looking for the dragon, that type of deal. Yeah.
Yeah, I have a plan this year to get a Limping for Jesus devotional out, and then we have a plan. I'm gonna do like a 90-day devotion, and then we're gonna do a 365, and then hopefully I'll write about my story and about how God finding Christ in cerebral palsy. So that's what I'm hoping to do. And then one day, if I can, I do want to try some sci-fi stuff, because I am a huge Trekkie and I am a huge nerd overall. But so I want to, before we get into what is a healthy church, I would like to know, when did you know you were called to be a pastor?
Yeah, so I didn't grow up in a Christian church at all. I became a Christian when I was 19, and I grew up in a family, kind of a godless family. And when I started, what happened was I met a lady that I used to go to high school with. She preached the gospel to me. I became a Christian. And then within a year, I started to have a ravenous desire to read the Bible and teach it. Like, it wasn't just read the Bible, but every single thing I read, I was like, ooh, I need to show somebody. Ooh, I need to show. It was like the little boy that gets a toy and has to show everybody the toy. And I didn't know that everyone wasn't like that. Like, I thought that was the way everybody was. And here I came to find it was more of like giftedness of teaching. So after about a year of serving at the church and just doing different things, youth stuff and teaching a Bible study, I realized God was calling me into ministry. I didn't know how that was going to look because I was heading into business for an accounting degree. So I didn't have I had no Bible college experience. I didn't even know how that works. And I had never desired to pursue it, but God just put it on my heart. And I started as an intern at our church, and I became the associate pastor, and I got all of my degrees while I was actually leading at the church. So it was a great way to kind of do both as the church grew. So that was,
so it was all at the Lord church.
Never been at another church. That's the only church
amazing.
I've ever.
Yeah.
They're stuck with me. They're stuck with me whether they want me or not. If they fire me, I'll still stay.
I have a similar story. My family were Catholic, but my pap said we were good Catholics in the way that I was like, "What do you mean?" He's like, "We don't have to go because we know we're bad people." So I didn't really have a church upbringing. I had some run-ins with like faith healers, and that kind of gave me a bad taste of religion. But I got saved at 19, and I got saved in a prosperity gospel church. So when I started to read the Bible, I realized, they're not really teaching what I'm reading. So I had a desire to like teach and preach, and thankfully I had a lot of Baptist. It's weird. I had a lot of Baptist pastors around me. And they were mentoring me, and I found guys like John Piper and Matt Chandler when Matt like really young. So I got really into Reformed theology for a bit, and but I got my story is similar. So that is rare that someone comes up through a church and reach pastoral ministry in that church. I think that's a biblical model. That's cool. So and I tell Sarah this all the time. I love how you and Pastor Mike, who's the senior pastor there, are a good balance for each other. And because you guys both teach, even though if you do a topical, what I have noticed, when you guys do topical sermons, you are still expositoring the text for people, and you both do that well. So
thank you.
So can you remember what your first sermon was about?
I do remember that very well. I think everybody remembers their first one. It was when about Peter getting out of the boat. And it's funny because towards the end of last year, I just re-preached this sermon, but I kind of rewrote it. And it was about this idea of the, just the typical what you would expect, like get out of the boat, meet God in the water. I remember having, it was probably like 25 pages long. I mean, I put every single thing in that sermon, all the illustrations, all the pauses. And I remember spending like probably 60 hours trying to put that thing together. And I preached on a Wednesday night for the first time. We had a Wednesday night church service and a prayer service, and there was like 20 people there, and I was so sick to my stomach. I mean, so anxious. But it was all about fear, getting past your fear and getting out of the boat. And it was so it was fun.
So 25 points.
Point
sermons.
It was all everything. When you're first doing it, you like put every single thing you've ever learned in there. You're trying to make sure that because when I first started preaching, my biggest fear was that I'm going to run out of stuff to teach before my time is up. Like I'd preach for 5 minutes and then I'm like, oh my gosh, I don't have, and I didn't realize as you get older, the problem's always the opposite. You're going to have too much to say and you have not enough time. So that became, kind of my shift.
Yeah. I did the same thing. I got my first sermon that I ever preached on a cassette tape. And it's 2006 at a youth Sunday service. I was our youth leader, and they let us, the kids, take over the service, and I did the sermon. And I'll never forget. I listened back to that sermon. I'm like, man, that guy sucked. but it's like I learned, and I know like Andy Stanley is like out there right now, but his one thing that I really learned from, I went to a Catalyst conference one time when that was big, and the idea of if God gives you 10 points in the sermon, preach 10 sermons. And that really changed the way I taught, because I never forget, I first time I ever preached, I did it at the city mission down in Washington. Homeless shelter down there. I had 25 pages of notebooks, and I get out on stage, and they had a big industrial fan that blew all my papers everywhere. And I was like, okay, God, I guess I'm gonna trust you. And from that point, I don't take notes up with me anymore. I don't do a manuscript. I do it during the week, but whatever will be. And I always like to leave room for the Holy Spirit to guide. Like, I don't like to be so stuck on things. But okay. So let's get into some deeper topics. What is church? Okay, I'll ask you that. And what is it not?
Yeah. Well, church is the people. It's the called out body of believers. And this is Sam thing. I mean, I'm sure there's like a bazillion books and definitions, but so the church is the body of Christ, and it's not a building, it's not a denomination, it's not a set of concepts. It's specifically those that are called out by Christ is kind of the way I look at the church. So when there's the capital C church, that is the universal, called out by Christ church. Then there's the little C church, which is our little organizations that we're running to try to continue to preach the gospel. And so that's we're all part of the, as Christians, we're part of the capital C. And it's our job to get people into the little C so that they grow in their relationship with Christ.
Yeah, part of trend that I see over the last 10 years at least is that even professing Christians are thinking that they don't need the church. And I see and one of the things we do here at Limping for Jesus is I try to address how to get past church hurt, how and I tackle some deconstruction folks, with like the deconstruction movement is huge right now, and I get why people that hurt keep them away from the local church. But when I was reading Mark Deaver's book in prep for this, like he says in the book, he says like your Christianity and being a part of the church are not separate things. Because your personal relationship to Jesus is being reconciled to God and his people. So you need to be part of a local church. So why do you think people don't, like, I'm talking about like believers who would call themselves believers. Why do you think in our culture today in the church that people don't see the importance of being part of a local seat?
Yeah. I have lots of opinions about this.
The
first thing I think is the culture. Obviously, the culture shifts since the pandemic, right? So everything's become so decentralized and individualized that there are people that feel like they're connected to, like, for example, you mentioned some churches like Matt Chandler's church, John Piper's church. They're like, well, I'm a part of those churches because I'm consuming their content. Maybe they give. And they, because of all of that being available, it's difficult for them to see that there's a component of connectedness. And again, even that word has become muddied because they're connecting digitally. And they're like, well, I don't need to be a part of a church because I'm like DMing, people from Matt Chandler's church or from Andy Stanley's church. Like, who cares, right? So that's a big shift, the shift of individual, kind of pick and choose what I want to do.
Yeah.
The second shift is this one's a little more, I want to say it's a little bit more nefarious. I think as a culture, especially in North America, and I can't speak to other cultures, but I think we've become pretty self-centered. And like part of the church, the local church connection is to find your place to serve and exercise your giftedness, in my opinion. Just like what you're doing here, you're exercising your giftedness and leadership, and you're training that muscle. If we just consume and go, well, I'm a part of, Andy Stanley's church because I watch his podcast and I listen. Well, you're not really, because you're not a part of you're not connecting in a way where you're giving back. So the self-centeredness part is I think it's directly Western culture, North American. And it's becoming more and more prevalent as this younger generation comes out. I'm not one of those people that's like, when I was a kid, I'm not that way. I'm just saying it's a challenge, right? It's a challenge that we have to face.
Like I hear older pastors all the time preach, people don't want God. People don't want God. People don't want God anymore. I don't know if that's true.
I don't think that's true.
And because with that football player getting injured, you've seen both teams, these millionaires realize money couldn't fix that young man's heart. And then you saw that Sports Center broadcast. He prayed to Jesus on air. So I know that I don't want to get into eschatology but I know that your view of end times, I think sometimes impacts your preaching, and I think sometimes people can be negative, even wherever you fall in end times theology. But like when I hear people say, "Oh, young people don't want God," I don't think that's what it is. In the book I'm reading, Mark Deaver says that he says this real powerful statement. He says, if you call yourself a Christian and you're not part of a local church, are you really saved? Because the understanding of being reconciled to God is to know that you're named among the called out ones. So for me, I know, like when I do a Bible study on the podcast, I usually will say to people from time to time, don't make this a substitute for being part of a fellowship. Like, see this as a supplement. And I know, like, when Matt Chandler starts his videos, they do an intro where they're like, he tells people, be part of a local church. So, I was reading 1 Corinthians 12 in prep for today, and I think it's verse 21 that says, like, just because you're not a hand, you can't say I don't need you if you're a foot. There's an idea right now, and it's hard because when I see a church like the Log Church, I see a church that's healthy. Like, you offer growth groups, you offer light groups, rooted. So, but it's like, how do you help younger people understand? Like, when I talk to people, like, I'm 41. So when I talk to people my age and younger, and I think it started with my generation too, like this idea that they think no church in the West can be trusted. And they say things, I've counseled people, I can do church with my boyfriend on the couch watching Charles Stanley or Matt Chandler. And it's like, how can you say that? Like, how can you say you know the gospel and not want to be part of the body?
Yeah, and I think the disconnection is largely fueled. And again, I try to be graceful about this stuff, right? So, and I know you
me
too
too.
when you're talking to people. So I a lot of it is fueled by some of these church hurt stories. Use your terminology, because it's like a lot of these people, regardless of age, have been sold a bill of goods, and then they come to find that it's they have Jesus, but then it's wrapped in all of this sinister packaging, stuff with sexual scandal. You have stuff with, leaders that the same leaders that are preaching the gospel are doing, illicit things with money. And it's easy for us to say, well, you can't judge Jesus by that person. But in a sense, we don't know I don't know what that's like, because I hit, I hit the jackpot cosmically in a sense by God putting me in a church where the leaders operate with integrity as, the standard. And so I have trouble imagining some of these situations. So I'm a little naive to that, but I can't comprehend what I would feel like if like one of the pastors was like, oh yeah, I got a girlfriend and blah, blah. Like that would destroy your world, it would destroy you, because it's like, a pastor is supposed to be almost like a consistent part of your family. And so I think all of that, the culture, the Western culture, the church hurt stuff, plus the prevalence of sermons and different things online, it's all feeding into this. I don't need the church, but that's where saying it's not that I need the church. Like I need to be in the church. I need to be serving the church. I need to be exercising my giftedness. That's the shift that needs to happen. And how it happens, I mean, if you figure it out, let me know, because I would gladly take whatever advice you could give, because it's a problem all churches I think are facing right now.
In my conversations with people that I know, I can talk about most of my pastoring has been in like small town rural churches. The idea is we're all at that size of a church, you're all a small group. So so what I have noticed is this expectation of a pastor being sinless, and when he proves to be flawed like we are, and we need grace too, that can shake people, because they put us on a pedestal, and then we're the Christian community. I know I heard it said before, we're the one army that likes to shoot our own. So I think that plays a part in it, and I have always told people, and this is why as a pastor, and when God's working on my own sanctification, I try to be who I am behind the pulpit that you'll see at the store on Monday. So I try really hard to do that. And I know my own attempts to do that. Transparency can burn you sometimes. But part of that church hurt, I tell people, you have to understand that your pastor, yes, he has a high calling. So, 1 Timothy, 2 Timothy, Titus, those standards are on pastors. However, they're just like you and they need grace. So this idea of, like you said, like I have noticed, like I've been around, I know as a youth pastor, one bad youth pastor who acts out with his student makes it harder for 10 legit youth pastors. And I think right now the Protestant church, I think we also get the baggage of scandals the last 20, 30 years in the Catholic Church too.
Oh yeah.
Because the everyday person just lumps us all together. So yeah. So okay. So you mentioned it. So let's talk about what should biblical leadership look like.
Well, it's going to be as diverse as the followers. So, I mean, that question to me, I guess what I would take that to be is like, what should it be biblical leadership emphasize? And if you think of, I mean, because we can always study like leaders and certain traits, but really the striking difference between biblical leadership and leadership in the marketplace would be humility. and servant leadership. And that's what's essentially needs to be modeled. If you look at Jesus and the way he led, his humility, his grace, and being able to focus on the people, that's what, in my opinion, needs to be emphasized if you're looking at leadership from a biblical perspective. You still have all of the same things that make a leader great, like the ability to administrate, like the Moses and Jethro situation. Like, you still look at those types of things from the logistics, but biblical leadership is an issue of focusing on the people and not on yourself. And that's why a lot of these things, like, it's a fine line, right? Like you said about pastors are human, that we are, of course, and we sin, absolutely we do. But as a pastor, I say every leader, and this is, I don't know where I heard this, but this might be something that it kind of has morphed over the years. Every level of leadership that you take on in your organization, especially in a church, it's a call to sacrifice certain freedoms for the sake of the people. So for instance, like, and I don't know people's stances of people that are listening, and I don't have a particular thing you should or shouldn't do this, but there's certain things that I don't do as a pastor that I just don't do, because not because I'm like, this is wrong, but because it's probably not good. I don't want people to think I do this. I don't want people to know I do this, that kind of thing, because it might hurt them. So I purposely don't do those things, and I'm sure you're probably aware of some of those examples and what they are, but I think that biblical leadership starts with a focus on, like, others that you're called to serve by God,
Yeah, I mean, I told Sarah this a couple of weeks ago. We were talking about that topic, like legalism pushes people away, but I do believe in so-called, for lack of a better term, personal legalisms. I personally will have certain things I don't do, I don't watch, I don't listen to, because it trips me up, and I don't want to trip other people up. Like, I can't watch certain movies, but I'm never going to get in a pulpit and say, if you don't do what I do, you're not a good Christian, because we're all wired different. We're all I'm blanking on the passage right now, but like as pastors, we have to, like you said, we just have to be mindful of people are watching our walk, and we don't want to trip anybody up. And so, because I learned this years ago. I was part of a small group, and like the leaders of the group, they came from another small group that was like more upper class, and at the end of every study they would get together, have dinner, and have like wine or beer or whatever. Well, they tried to create that culture at our small group, and we had some people in our group that were recovering alcoholics, and I remember like, hey guys, we can't do this. Like, one of the guys was there, and he was he was coming off of relapsing for 3 weeks, and I was like, if we're going to be representing Christ as a light group, we can't be popping bottles when our brother, when our brother battles that. So that is a good thing to be mindful of. So
and I think that's pretty much the definition of Christian liberty, right? I mean, if you look at Paul, when he talks about meat sacrifice to idols, and when he talks about how you approach that, he's saying you could do it, but you have to do it in deference to those that are around you that are weak, and not in terms of like your own freedom. And that's the shift. And so, like, it comes down to that shift, so that doesn't, and like you said, with legalism would be on both sides of the spectrum, because it would be like me getting up and like, and going the opposite direction, saying, hey, I watched this really good R-rated movie last night that's good, and it doesn't have, and I tell everyone they should watch that movie. And then if you come to me and go, hey, me and Sarah, like, we're not like, I'm not a big fan of the R-rated movies, whatever. The legalism would also flip, where I'd go, oh, well, what are you? I guess you're holy and I'm not. And, I try to bully you, because all of us are so insecure that we're doing the wrong thing.
Yeah, I know. one church that I worked at. We I don't know why we did this. We did at the movies. You remember that trend? When
Oh,
churches were
I've heard of that. Yeah, yeah. I've heard it
so
can be done well if they
yeah
do it, you know.
yeah. So I remember, you know, fresh out Bible college, and me and my other pastor buddy, we were like they did Man It's Still, and
Oh.
we were like they were pointing out the Christ references in Superman, and
Mm-hmm.
and so I know, like I thought that it was trying to reach non-believers,
Mm-hmm.
and bringing the gospel in a way that was timely.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, but I know some people had uh, issues with the fact that it was like they didn't see it as preaching the gospel, and
Yeah.
I feel like we need to walk a fine line, because I know I like what Rick Warren says. He goes, "We need to learn how to preach timeless truth in a timely way." And
Mm-hmm.
I feel like we as a church, like Sarah mentions this to me, like when I'm teaching or whatever, try not to sound so churchy all the time, because I can, like, I believe doctrine matters, and sometimes using words like sanctification and adoption and all, like those, or propitiation. I'm it's amazing I can say it. But like these words are important.
You're muted. You're muted.
Can you hear
There we
me?
go. Yeah, I can. Your microphone was blinking and then it came back
Yeah,
on.
yeah, yeah. I hit it with my hand and it fell. I have
That's
it on
okay.
this. I have it on this stack of Bibles,
Oh,
and
okay.
yeah.
So
So
literally, you're swearing on a stack of Bibles, right, Mike?
yeah, I know. I can't. I don't. I better not say the wrong thing. So I don't want to be struck down mid podcast. So yeah. So I do believe that, like churches, when I try to engage with people on TikTok a lot that are into there's a lot of people who were like raised pastor kids who are speaking out against church now, uh, speaking out against Christianity, and being a dad, and my son's 12 now. What I have learned is, with a lot of people, when I was a youth pastor, kids are honest and
Mm-hmm.
teens are honest, and I had a lot of teens tell me that they came to church because their parents made them,
Mm-hmm.
and then when they got to college, they go buck wild,
Yeah.
because it wasn't real for them yet. And so when I, like, we can't judge anyone's salvation. We can look at fruit, and stuff like that. But when I talk to people on TikTok that say they were, the one that is really gaining a lot of traction right now is John Piper's son, Abraham.
Yeah. You still there? You're frozen.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay,
Can
you
you
still
see
there?
me?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I can now.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So there is this segment of people who grew up in the church speaking out against the church that I
Mm-hmm.
don't know if, what I feel is what happens is the church that they see on the pages of scripture are not what they experience. And I think that leaves a lot of people jaded.
Mm-hmm.
So what would you say to someone like that to encourage them to keep looking for a healthy church?
So to look for a healthy church, there's a couple things. The first, and I've said this to a lot of people that have moved from, if they move further away and they can't go to our church, I don't think our church is the healthiest church by any stretch of the imagination, but I'll say this. Every single church you go to is going to have things you don't like about it. 1,000%. So like a lot of times people go, I went and they had this and they had this and they had this. And I didn't like, I'm like, okay, well, what did you like about it? Well, I say, because these are people, these are human beings, and we're running an organization to try to serve people, right? So the first thing you have to realize is you're going to have to accept that some of those things are going to irritate you, and you have to be willing to let that go. And, in my opinion, but it has to be to your own conscience and convictions. Like you said, if there were certain things that were happening and you felt trepidation because you're like, I don't think this is the right, I don't think that these are, well, then you have to make the decision that that's not your church. So the second thing is, you have to give it a little bit of time. You might, I don't think it's going to be a one Sunday and lightning comes down and this is your church, like your place is here. I don't think it works like that. I think after like a couple weeks of you going, hearing the preaching for a couple weeks, music, trying to get involved in something beyond just Sunday. And that this is where, and this is going to be completely counter seeker movement, counter emergent church stuff. But this is where I think as a Christian, this burden falls on the person that's going to that church to investigate like they would. Like I've always said, if my wife and I, if I was out of the church, let's say like Pastor Mike was like, Sam, your preaching's too bad, you're too funny, and I'm insecure about it, whatever, he just tells me I can't be there anymore. I'd have to make a decision. Like I wouldn't go to the church anymore, obviously, because I'd feel like it would be a distraction to the church. So within a week, I would start looking for churches that I would fit into, and the burden would fall on me, not the churches to woo me like, ooh, what do you got, what's the group like? Ooh, is it expository or is it topical? Do you have life groups or do you do growth groups, semester based? Like what do you like? No, the burden is on me. I have to get plugged in, like you were saying at the beginning, like it's my job to get connected to a local body, so I have to do my due diligence, for lack of a better spiritual term for that, to find where I belong and not put the burden on the church. Like, I wasn't really fed there. I wasn't being fed there. I didn't like the music. It felt like worldly. I'm like, well, then go to a different church, and like, who cares? I mean, I don't mean to be mean, but you have to, this is where you have to have that grace and be willing to say, this church isn't probably a fit for me. They're doing a lot of good things, but I'm going to keep looking for my place,
Yeah, American consumerism has come into the church. I did a podcast. My last podcast was about I called it congregational consumerism, and I talked about I talked about the what's your role? Like I did one a couple weeks ago about, I called it Dear Young Pastors, and I talked about a pastor's role to his church. You should do it because you're called. You should do it because you love people. If you don't love God, you don't love people, find something else to do. And then this next episode, I talked about the congregation. Here's what I have learned about some churches that are not healthy. And I had a pastoral mentor teach me this. Church can be the one place where people who don't have any power in their life get power.
Wow, that's good.
They become elders, they become deacons, they become Sunday school teachers, and if they don't have the Lord's on their heart, it can be real messy, real fast, and it becomes about what they desire. Preference becomes king. I know a lot of local churches who want a preacher to show up on Sunday, but they don't want a shepherd during the week.
No.
So going off what you said, what I've noticed about people, and I tried to tell my friends this, who are more introverted, is if you go to certain churches, you can hide in the back for years.
Yeah.
If your church has a small group, you have to connect. You have to try, because like even with Rooted, and I want to give you a chance to talk about Rooted. Like you can hide in Root. What I noticed is when I took Rooted with Sarah, and I knew as a pastor, I knew this was going to happen. Strongholds week.
Oh,
People dip out. People dip out. They come back the next week, but they're missing out on. I mean, you know, as a pastor, when I didn't know anyone there but Sarah. And, you know, as a pastor, people look at us a certain way. So there was that part of me that was saying, don't be too transparent about your strongholds, Mike. Because but think about the everyday Christian who they feel that too. So a lot of times people, I feel like they don't give real church a chance because they're scared to be judged.
Mm-hmm.
Can you speak to that?
Yeah. I think that it comes down to, again, kind of what you were talking about on your podcast previously with that previous church experience filtering into their current church, right? Like, so they're taking that like judgmental experience that they had maybe at the last church, and they're painting all the churches in that context, especially when they come in. And what we've heard a lot, because, you know, I'll be honest, and I think if you've been at the church, you'll know, like, we don't tend to shy away from like difficult topics, and Mike we stay on. No, yeah. So and we stay on.
And Pastor Mike thinks out loud a lot.
Yeah, he does. Yeah, he does. And as he gets older, that gets worse. So
yeah.
So with us, we're known as like, oh, they're going to be straightforward, and that's just the way they are. Well, what people will take is that we're judgmental. But in reality, I told Pastor Mike a couple months ago, we were talking, and I said, I wish people knew more of how we were behind the scenes than just what they see in the pulpit, because we deal with people that are in things that we preach against, that, you know, we deal with them where they are, because we believe that but we have to stay strong on our stances on these things, right? Because they're two different things. Otherwise, you know, what's the point of doctrine? What's the point of all of it if you're not taking stances? So, but to answer your question, because I kind of got into the weeds,
yeah, sorry.
The judgmental. That. No, that was my fault, because my brain is like, you know, it's like a ping pong. When you talked about how do you avoid that judgmental thing, you have to realize if somebody's judgmental towards you and you're looking for a church, it says a lot more about them than you.
Yeah,
it has a lot more to say about them than you. So this is where, and getting back to, I know this, I'm like a broken record, but this is where that self-centered mindset comes in. Like, if we're thinking of ourselves, what we're going to think of is when I walk through the door of a new church, everyone's thinking about me. They know about my divorce. They know about what I'm, and that's just not true. It's just not true. And what it is, excuse me, in my opinion, is the enemy trying to keep that person from getting connected with them believing the lie that people are thinking. People have their own problems. And I'm not saying that there aren't some, maybe if you're in a big scandal or something, people are going to be thinking about it. But look at how quickly people forget certain things. Yeah. Do you think they're going to really be focusing on you? So like, if you go to something like Rooted, like I did that Strongholds, I went to Rooted, not in the one that you were in. I went to the one after, and during that Strongholds week, I was nervous because I'm like, I want to be authentic, but at the same thing, I don't want to make people feel, you know, like differently towards me. So I was about to do, if you remember, and I know we probably should give some context. In our Rooted discipleship program, there's a week called Strongholds that Mike is referring to, and it's a week where you openly talk, with a group of men and a group of women. They separate them, and you talk about, they give you a list of the most common biblical strongholds and how to openly talk about these so you can pray for them, pray against them. And so when my turn came, there was another elder that was with me, and Matt Bosco was there, but the other elder, Pastor Joe Abraham, he put his hand on my shoulder and he looked at the other men in the group. He goes, before he says a word, and this was probably one of the kindest things that anyone's ever done in ministry to me. He was like, just know that this is a man who is a family man. He loves his family. He sacrifices for the church. And he said all these things. He said, he is a human being. And him even being here was a big step of authenticity. So that means that we have to care about him with as much confidentiality and non-judgment as we would about anyone, regardless of what he does for a living. And like, it was such a fresh, like overflow of kindness and caring, because he was trying to protect me
Mhm.
against the thing that you are talking about right now, this judgmental thing. And, so it gave me the permission to be authentic in that moment. And I appreciate that. So you have to know your connections when it comes to that judgmental thing. I mean, you don't be open about everything to everyone, because some people are going to hurt you. That it's a relational based thing, right?
Yeah, you hit it right on the head. Like, I know when I was when I was a senior pastor, it ended with divorce, and I felt that fear of because in my mind I wanted it to be the cerebral palsy Charles Spurgeon of my day, and then I went through a real life issue of divorce as a pastor, and I'm thinking, like, because when I was a child, my senior pastor went through a divorce, and I saw how he was judged. Like, he went from pastoring to delivering pizza to my house. So I had that in my mind, and I remember trying to, like, I knew I had to stay connected to a church. And I know that I slowly put my foot in the water, and I know that it was Rooted who reminded me that people are not judging me because of they don't even know who I am.
No,
and most people are not thinking about you; they're thinking about their kids, their health, their
themselves.
bills. Yeah. So I know, like, when I was interviewed at my last church, like, I think, like, the small churches are funny. The whole church got to interview me and Sarah, and
that's a lot.
Yeah. So I had to explain what my hand tattoo was. I had to explain my marriage. I had to explain things. But the grace there, one woman got up and said, "Well, I've been through a divorce, pastor, and it makes you more real and relatable. We know you've been through." Fellow pastors, I'm not suggesting that you go through that. Fight for your marriage. But if you go through hard things, whatever, God's not done with you, and you can be open to a church community. I think that's what you're trying to say.
Yes.
Yeah. So I remember.
Yeah, and also those hard things, remember, like, you have to heal too. So you have to evaluate this in your process of healing. And when it comes to the church, like, what the enemy will do is he will keep trying to use those hurts to keep you from the next place that God wants you. And the fear of what might be will keep you from the possibility of what could be. And that's what happens when people approach church this way,
Yeah. And I gotta say, the enemy was working on me for a while there. And the one thing that helped me the most is, like, I had pastor friends telling me to just, like, take a time out on ministry. But with and I talked to Pastor Mike about this, and, like he said, behind the scenes, like, I once, because Pastor Mike is so, like, in your face about biblical matters, I once told Sarah, I don't know if I want him at my bedside when I'm dying.
But did you notice different he was behind the scenes? Is that what you were going to say?
Yeah. So he helped counsel me a couple months ago before I had to go to court for custody issues, and he was so caring, and he's been there. He's been through a lot of stuff with his own kids, and so my point is, like, I had to learn, like, my bounce back because of my overcoming trauma as a kid, cerebral palsy, all that stuff. My bounce back is it's quicker than some people.
Yeah, you have resiliency.
Yeah. So I took a year off of all ministry.
You froze a little bit. Oh, there you go. Okay, I see it.
Are we back?
Yeah. Go ahead.
Okay. So okay,
You
thanks,
took it. You said
Internet.
you took a year
Yeah,
off. You said.
I took a year off of ministry. I went through divorce care. That's a Christian
Yeah,
counseling.
great
Yeah,
program.
yeah. I went through divorce care. I did all that. I went through therapy. Did all that.
Good.
But it was needed. But through that year and a half, or whatever, you know, it was just me preaching to myself. There's truth that I used to preach to others. Like
Mm-hmm.
God still loves me. God still has a purpose for me. Like He's not done. He didn't give me these gifts to just wipe them out now.
Mm-hmm.
But it started with what you said is uh like there was that knee jerk reaction where I couldn't give in to the devil, believing that people were thinking about me. Like I was a small time pastor in a small town of like 600 people. No
Mm-hmm.
one outside of that realm knew who I was. So give yourself some grace, Mike.
Yeah,
So
exactly.
yeah.
Yeah, and that's the way that's the way to look at it too. And also that God can use you in a different season, a different time, So
Mm-hmm.
but we all need to heal, and we all, like, your podcast, we all need to learn how to live with that limp, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep. And that's why I tell people like limping could mean limping well, physically, emotional, relational, spiritual. And that's why
Mm-hmm.
God led me to do this ministry because I feel like, I tell people all the time, if I was born without CP, I don't think
Mm-hmm.
God could use me the way He's using me right now
Yeah.
because people can look at me as a pastor and knows, hey, this guy's been through some things and he still trusts God. And
Yes.
and and I hope that that is what people gain from this ministry. But because I know, and today I hope today's episode will help them realize like don't give up on church
Yeah.
because of of whatever. Like you've been through hurt. So the one thing that I want to close on is it's okay. So Ephesians chapter 4 says that our role as pastors is to equip the saints for the ministry of the Lord.
Mm-hmm.
So, so in your context at the Lord Church, how do you get over that idea that Pastor Mike and Sam and the other pastors, it's not all on them, that you guys are the church?
Mm-hmm. There's two ways that I've kind of crossed that bridge. The first is I realize my own limitations as a leader. I know I'm very, very aware of my weaknesses as a leader. So I know that like there are things that like when we have to do them, I do them, but I know that this is not my area of expertise or gifting or even like secular ability. It's not there.
Yeah.
So first, recognizing the limitation that I have in myself. I can't do all the things well. I can't. I could do like a handful of things well.
Yeah.
The second thing is recognizing that not only can I not do things well, but there are people that God has called around you that can do them infinitely better, and they're spiritually gifted to do those things. So what we do is like, I'm not going to sit here and figure out how to structure the technology for the church, but we find people that are gifted in those things and we empower them because that's what God's using them to do. Pastor Mike does that. If he finds someone, this is who's leading this is it. And we empower them to lead in the way that God's calling them. And it usually works out 100 times better than we would think. So it's not just the fact that, we're in charge, but what we're in charge of in terms of the administration of the ministry is we're in charge of equipping people to do what God's called them to do. That's what that's the thing, according to that passage and according to the implications of the pastoral epistles. It's an overseer. It's not a overdoer. Right.
Yeah.
And so that's where kind of our philosophy is on that.
Okay. Do you, before we close, do you have any closing thoughts?
No, I just appreciate what you're doing and how you're trying to help leaders and how you're trying to help people get connected. And the last thing I would say is just to emphasize what we talked about in terms of if you're looking for a church, don't give up on the idea of church. It's it's the vehicle that God is going to use maybe to get you connected into a more meaningful way with him. And sure, you can find him online. Sure, you can have a relationship with God online, but we're called to connect. We're not meant to be, separate and siloed. And you can have meaningful connections online, but you have to consider not just like being a consumer, but being a participant and actively engaging in online community, right? Like kind of like what you're doing here. It's like active. It's not passive. It's not just like, oh yeah, I'm in church because I watched a sermon. No, I'm in church because I led a group or I connected to somebody. Right? That's the difference. So
yeah, amen. Well, thank you for being on the show. I am so grateful that you were the first pastor that I got to interview in 2023.
Well, thanks.
I have a couple of my other buddies lined up to be interviewed from different church settings. I have a buddy that planted a church with his wife down in North Carolina, and I got a buddy in Pittsburgh that is a church planter also.
Great.
And then this weekend from your church, I'm interviewing Matt Candace.
Matt's the best. Honestly, he's the best. So I can't even say enough about him.
Like we're going to be talking about the importance of serving the Lord together as a couple. So I'm totally pumped for that. Like with this podcast, I'm trying to give people I'm trying to show them that Christians are real. We're relatable. We're not hiding in our homeschool huddles with our King James Bibles, thinking everyone else is bad. Like we go through stuff too, and we have the greatest story ever told. We have the story of Jesus becoming a man, living the life that we can't live, dying the death we deserve, and we get to become part of his family now. So thank you for being a part of this and for the first of my What is a Healthy Church series.
Great.
So hopefully the internet didn't totally cut out on us. A couple of times we both froze, but it's what you get with live broadcasting. So thank you, Sam. I hope you have a great rest of your day. And to everyone else, well, and then love. God bless and have a great day.
Okay.
All right.
Good seeing you, Mike.
All right. See you, Sam.
Bye-bye.
Okay. Bye.